Universal horror commissions study how humans process fear through creative expression. Doctor stared at the data streaming across her workstation and felt her secondary heart skip a beat. The neural scans couldn't be right. She ran the analysis again, then a third time. The results didn't change. Humans were doing something impossible. She turned to her assistant, a young named whose scales still showed the bright green of youth. Pull up the comparison data. All species. I want to see fear response patterns across the entire database. His claws clicked against his console. Within moments, hundreds of graphs filled the display wall. Every known sapient species in the galaxy, their fear responses mapped and measured. The patterns were universal. When presented with danger stimuli, every species showed the same reaction. Immediate threat assessment, stress hormone release, fight or flight activation. When the danger passed, the response ended. Clean, predictable, healthy. Except for humans. The human data looked wrong. Their fear responses spiked in the absence of actual danger. Their stress hormones flooded their systems while they sat in perfect safety. And most disturbing of all, their pleasure centers lit up at the same time. "This can't be right," said, his voice trembling. Are humans experiencing some kind of species-wide psychological break?" Had been studying for 40 standard years. She had seen many strange things in that time, but this was new. This was alarming. Send a priority alert to the Galactic Psychological Consortium. We need an emergency commission. 3 days later, stood before a panel of the galaxy's leading psychological experts. The council chamber on Station Harmony was designed to put visitors at ease, with soft lighting and walls that shifted colors to match the emotional state of the occupants. Right now, those walls were a muddy brown. Concern. "Let me understand this correctly," said Chairman, whose 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Humans are intentionally exposing themselves to fear stimuli." "Not just exposing themselves," said. She pulled up a video file. "They're creating it." The video showed a human dwelling dimly lit. A human female sat on a soft chair holding a bound collection of papers. A book, humans called it. The female's biometric data scrolled alongside the video. As she read, her heart rate increased. Her breathing quickened. Stress hormones spiked. Every indicator showed she was terrified. But she kept reading. "What is she experiencing?" asked Doctor, whose empathic abilities made her particularly sensitive to emotional distress. "According to the humans," said, "she's reading a horror story." Silence filled the chamber. "A what?" asked. "Horror, it's a category of human creative expression. They write stories, create videos, and produce games specifically designed to frighten them." Pulled up more data. "They have entire industries dedicated to it. They call it entertainment." The walls shifted to a sickly yellow, confusion mixed with distress. "This is a survival malfunction," declared Doctor, whose species had evolved on a death world. Even they, who had faced predators that could swallow them whole, knew better than to seek out fear. "We need to intervene before this spreads to other species." "I recommend we study them first," said. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." The commission voted, would lead a research team to Earth. The human who met them at the spaceport was smiling, had learned that humans showed teeth when they were happy, though the gesture still triggered her instinct to flee. This human was young by their standards, perhaps 30 standard years old. He wore casual clothing and carried a bag over one shoulder. "Doctor, I'm honored to be part of your study." He extended his hand and carefully touched it with her own manipulator appendage. Human handshakes were their version of the greeting touch. "Mister, thank you for volunteering," said. "I understand you're a horror writer." "That's right. I've published 8 novels and about 30 short stories, all horror." He said this with pride as if it were an accomplishment. Exchanged glances with, and people read these stories willingly. "Oh, absolutely. Horror is one of the most popular genres. has been for thousands of years across every human culture, led them toward ground transportation. I'm guessing that seems weird to you. It seems pathological, said before could stop him. Laughed, the sound made scales ripple. Yeah, I can see how it would look that way, but trust me, it's completely normal for us. They arrived at its home, a structure made of wood and glass. Inside, the walls were lined with books, thousands of them, Notice staring. My collection, he said. Horror novels mostly, some science fiction and fantasy mixed in. Can I offer you anything? Water. We have some excellent alien-compatible beverages if you'd like. We're fine, said. She activated her recording device. Mister, I'd like to start with a simple question. Why do you write horror? Settled into a chair and thought for a moment. Because it's fun. Fun, repeated. You find fear enjoyable. When it's fictional fear, yes, look, let me explain. Leaned forward. Humans have always been afraid of things. Death, darkness, the unknown, losing the people we love. These fears are hardwired into us. We can't escape them. So you create more fear? Asked, confused. No, we transform it. When I write a horror story about, say, a monster in the dark, I'm taking a primal fear and giving it shape. I'm putting it on the page where I can control it, where readers can experience it in safety. Felt like she was missing something fundamental. But the fear response is real. We've measured it. Your readers experience genuine terror. Absolutely, that's the point. Stood and pulled a book from his shelf. This is my latest novel. It's about a haunted space station. When people read it, they get scared. Their hearts race. They might jump at sudden noises in their own homes. Some people read it at night and then can't sleep. And they enjoy this? Asked. They love it because they know it's not real. They know they're safe. It's like, paused, searching for words. It's like practicing for danger when there is no danger. We get to experience the fear, feel the adrenaline, go through the emotions, but we don't get hurt. And when we close the book or turn off the movie, the fear ends. We controlled it. Felt something click in her mind. You're rehearsing. Exactly, face brightened. That's a great way to put it. Horror lets us explore our fears in a controlled environment. It lets us face the things that terrify us most, but on our own terms. But why would you want to feel fear at all? Asked. My people avoid fear at all costs. When we experience it, the trauma can last for months. Sat back down, his expression growing more serious. Fear is part of being human. We can't avoid it. Life is full of scary things. But if we run from fear, if we never face it, it controls us. Horror teaches us that we can survive being afraid, that we're stronger than we think. Spent the next hour watching describe his writing process. He explained how he built tension, how he crafted scares, how he balanced hope and despair. He spoke with the precision of a scientist and the passion of an artist. He showed them messages from readers who thanked him for his stories, who said his books helped them through difficult times. This reader, said, pulling up a message on his communication device, lost her mother last year. She wrote to tell me that reading my novels helped her process her grief. The horror stories gave her a way to feel scared and sad in a context she could manage. Fiction became a safe space to explore her real pain. That's, struggled for words, that's sophisticated emotional regulation. Is it? Shrugged. For us, it's just normal. We've been telling scary stories since we lived in caves. Every culture on Earth has ghost stories, monster myths, tales of terror. It's part of what makes us human. That evening, back at their temporary research facility, compiled her initial findings. Sat across from her, still processing what they'd witnessed. They're not broken, said quietly. They're advanced. How can fear-seeking be advanced? Asked. Because they've learned to weaponize their own emotions. They've turned their greatest vulnerability into a tool for growth. Pulled up neural scans from their meeting. Look at this. Even while discussing horror, while explaining terrifying scenarios, his stress levels remained baseline. He has complete emotional control. by exposing himself to fictional fear repeatedly, by mastering fear through engagement rather than avoidance. Sat back. Every other species in the galaxy treats fear as something to escape. Humans treat it as something to understand. They've created an entire artistic tradition around exploring terror safely. The Commission won't believe this, said. Then we'll show them. Began compiling video files, neural scans, interview transcripts. We'll show them that humans aren't psychologically compromised. They're psychologically evolved. She thought about Smile when he talked about his work, the genuine joy he took in crafting stories designed to terrify. She thought about his readers, seeking out his books willingly, eager to be scared. She thought about thousands of years of human culture, filled with ghost stories and monster legends and tales of horror. Most species in the galaxy had never learned to sit with their fear. They ran from it, suppressed it, let it traumatize them. Humans had learned something different. They had learned to invite fear in, look it in the eye, and transform it into art. Wasn't sure what the Commission would make of her findings, but she knew one thing with certainty. She had dramatically underestimated humanity. Again. Before she left Earth, she asked one final question. Are you ever afraid in real life, outside of your stories? Had smiled that tooth-showing smile. Of course, I'm human. I get scared all the time. And I write about it. I turn my real fears into fictional monsters. Then I defeat those monsters on the page. It doesn't make the real fear go away completely, but it makes it manageable. It reminds me that I'm stronger than I think. As their ship left Earth's orbit, looked down at the blue planet below and wondered what other impossible things humans had learned to do with their emotions. If they could turn fear into entertainment, into therapy, into art, what else were they capable of? She had a feeling she'd spend the rest of her career trying to answer that question. The Galactic Psychological Consortium received its initial report with skepticism. A dozen senior psychologists reviewed her data, interviewed her team, and studied the human materials she'd brought back. The consensus was clear. They needed more evidence. One human writer is not a sufficient sample size, Chairman declared. We need to understand the full scope of this phenomenon. So returned to Earth with an expanded team. This time, they didn't just interview creators. They embedded themselves in human culture to observe horror in its natural habitat. Their first stop was something humans called a horror film festival. The team arrived at a large building in a human city, where hundreds of humans had gathered to watch scary movies for 3 days straight, found the concept absurd. A festival celebrating fear. It was like throwing a party to honor disease. But the humans were excited. They lined up eagerly, chattering about which films they wanted to see, which directors they admired, which monsters scared them most. Some wore costumes depicting horror characters. One human had painted their face to look like a corpse. They seemed delighted by this. This is mass delusion, muttered Doctor, a psychologist who had joined the expedition. They're celebrating their own psychological dysfunction. Let's observe before we judge, said, though privately she had similar doubts. They entered a theater, a dark room with rows of seats facing a large screen. Teams scattered among the human audience, biometric sensors recording everything. The lights dimmed. The film began. For the next 2 hours, watched humans voluntarily experience terror. The film was about a creature that hunted humans in an isolated location. The cinematography was designed to maximize fear. Sudden movements, harsh sounds, moments of quiet broken by violence. Her own hearts raced just from watching, and she wasn't even the target audience. The humans around her screamed. They jumped in their seats. They covered their eyes, then peeked through their fingers. Their biometric data showed genuine fear responses. Cortisol flooded their systems. Their hearts pounded. Some clutched the arms of their chairs so hard their knuckles turned white. But here's what shocked. Halfway through a particularly frightening scene, The human next to her leaned over to his companion and whispered, "The sound design in this is incredible. Did you hear how they layered the creatures breathing with the wind?" The companion nodded enthusiastically. "And that long shot before the kill, the cinematographer is a genius." They were terrified and analyzing the craft simultaneously. Their brains were processing fear and critical appreciation at the same time. Checked her scanner. Both humans showed elevated fear responses, but their prefrontal cortexes remained active. They were experiencing fear while maintaining rational thought. That shouldn't be possible. After the film, the humans applauded. They smiled and discussed their favorite moments. "That part where she opened the door," one human said to another. "I nearly jumped out of my skin." "I know, and when the lights went out, I was holding my breath." They were proud of being scared. They were sharing their fear like a good experience. Recorded everything, her mind racing. Over the next week, the research team attended more screenings, interviewed dozens of festival attendees, and analyzed thousands of data points. Patterns emerged. Humans had categorized fear. They distinguished between jump scares and creeping dread, between psychological horror and gore, between supernatural and realistic threats. They had created frameworks for understanding what scared them and why. They debated these categories with the passion other species reserved for art criticism or scientific discourse. Because for humans, fear was both. Doctor, whose empathic abilities let her sense emotions, pulled aside on the third day. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "When these humans watch horror films, I can feel their fear. It's genuine and intense. But underneath it, there's something else. Curiosity, excitement, joy even. They're experiencing multiple complex emotions simultaneously." "Emotional sophistication," said. "Beyond anything I've encountered," gestured at the humans milling around the festival. "My species can barely handle one strong emotion at a time. Strong fear would overwhelm us completely, but humans can be terrified and analytical at once, scared and happy. They've learned to experience fear without being controlled by it." The team's next investigation took them to a haunted house, a temporary structure built specifically to frighten people. Humans paid money to walk through it while actors jumped out to scare them. Thought it was the most irrational thing she'd ever heard of. Until she watched it work. A group of human teenagers entered the haunted house, holding hands and laughing nervously. His team followed at a distance, recording. As actors in monster costumes leaped out from the darkness, the teens screamed and ran and clutched each other. Their fear was real. Could see it in every biometric reading. But when they emerged from the exit, they were laughing, exhilarated. One girl's hands were still shaking, but she was grinning. "Did you see that clown?" she said to her friends. "I thought I was going to die." "The chainsaw guy got me so bad," another replied. They compared their experiences, finding camaraderie in their shared fear. The haunted house hadn't traumatized them. It had brought them closer together. Approached, his scales showing the orange of confusion. "Doctor, I don't understand. They knew the threats weren't real. They knew actors were trying to scare them. Why did they still get frightened?" "Because humans can hold two truths at once," said, the realization dawning on her. "They know it's not real, but they allow themselves to react as if it is. They consent to being frightened. It's a willing suspension of disbelief combined with genuine emotional response." "That's incredibly sophisticated cognitive control," said. "Yes," agreed, "it is." The research team expanded their investigation. They analyzed human horror literature going back thousands of years, ancient Earth texts about ghosts and demons, medieval stories of monsters, modern novels about serial killers and cosmic horrors. Every era of human history produced horror stories. Every culture contributed to the tradition. Doctor made a breakthrough while studying human mythology. "Look at this," he said, displaying his findings. "Humans don't just create fictional horrors. They transformed their real fears into mythological ones. When they feared disease, they created stories about vampires draining life. When they feared invasion, they wrote about body-snatching aliens. When they feared losing their humanity, they invented stories about werewolves and mad scientists. They're encoding their cultural anxieties into narratives, said, and then working through those anxieties by engaging with the narratives, continued. It's a form of collective therapy. The whole species is processing its fears through storytelling. The team conducted more interviews. They spoke with horror directors, special effects artists, composers who scored scary films. Each one spoke with deep knowledge about the psychology of fear. They understood packing, atmosphere, the architecture of a good scare. They knew how to manipulate their audience's emotions with precision. One composer explained her process. Fear is about anticipation. You have to build tension slowly. Let the audience know something bad is coming, but not when. The music should make your skin crawl before anything scary happens on screen. That's how you create effective horror. She spoke like a scientist. Her art form had rules, techniques, theories. Humans had spent refining their understanding of fear, turning instinct into craft. But the most profound insight came from an unexpected source. The team visited a human therapist named Dr. Sarah, who specialized in treating trauma. She invited them to her office, a calm space with soft chairs and warm lighting. "You want to understand why humans engage with horror?" Doctor asked. She pulled out a stack of papers. "Let me tell you about exposure therapy." She explained how human psychologists treated fear disorders. When someone developed a phobia, they didn't avoid the feared object. Instead, they gradually exposed themselves to it in controlled settings. A person afraid of spiders might start by looking at pictures, then videos, then eventually being in the same room as a spider. By facing the fear in safety, they learned to manage it. Horror fiction works on the same principle, Doctor said. It's self-administered exposure therapy. People who read horror novels or watch scary movies are practicing how to handle fear. They're building emotional resilience. "You use horror as a therapeutic tool?" asked. "Sometimes, yes. I have patients who experienced real trauma, car accidents, violent crimes, war. They struggle with intrusive fears. But when they read horror fiction, they're able to experience fear in a context they control. They can put down the book if it becomes too much. They can pause the movie. That sense of control helps them process their real fears." Doctor showed them case studies. A veteran with combat trauma who used zombie apocalypse films to work through his experiences. A survivor of a home invasion who read mystery thrillers to feel safer in her own house. A woman who'd lost a child and found comfort in ghost stories about parents and children reuniting. Horror gives people a framework, Doctor explained. It lets them approach their fears from an angle. Instead of confronting, "I'm afraid of dying," they can think about, "What would I do in a zombie apocalypse?" It's the same fear, but mediated through fiction. That distance makes it approachable. "And this works?" Doctor asked, fascinated. "Remarkably well for many people. Not everyone, and it's not a replacement for traditional therapy. But for some individuals, horror fiction becomes a valuable tool for emotional processing. They're not running from their fears. They're running toward them, but in a way that feels safe." Felt like pieces of a vast puzzle were clicking together. Humans don't just experience fear through horror. They metabolize it. They break it down, understand it, integrate it. Horror is how they digest their anxieties. "That's a good way to put it," Doctor said. "Fear is inevitable in life. Everyone experiences loss, danger, uncertainty. Most organisms try to avoid these feelings, but humans have learned that avoidance doesn't work. So instead, we've developed ways to engage with fear productively. Horror is one of our most successful techniques." The research team spent 3 more months on Earth, gathering data. They attended horror conventions where tens of thousands of humans gathered to celebrate scary stories. They visited bookstores with entire sections dedicated to horror. They watched humans create horror content on their communication networks, sharing scary stories in online communities. Everywhere they looked, they found humans engaging with fear voluntarily, enthusiastically, and with remarkable sophistication. Horror wasn't a symptom of dysfunction. It was evidence of advanced emotional intelligence. On their final night on Earth, his team gathered to compile their findings. The data was overwhelming. Thousands of interviews, millions of biometric readings, centuries of cultural analysis, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Humans have weaponized fear, said, reviewing his notes. They've taken their most primal emotion and turned it into a tool for growth, entertainment, therapy, and social bonding. They've systematized it, added, created genres, techniques, theories. They study fear the way we study physics. And they've democratized it, said. Nearly every human engages with horror in some form. It's not just a few individuals. It's a species-wide adaptation. Looked at the blue planet outside their ship's viewport. Every other species in the galaxy treats fear as the enemy, something to overcome, suppress, or flee from. Humans treat it as a teacher. They learn from their fear. They grow from it. They've evolved a relationship with terror that we can barely comprehend. The Commission still won't believe it, said. Then we'll make them believe it, replied. She began organizing the data for her final report. We'll show them that humanity hasn't malfunctioned. They've innovated. They've developed an emotional technology that no other species possesses. As the ship prepared for departure, thought about everything she'd learned. She thought about, in his novels, about the teenagers in the haunted house, about Doctor and her patients, about millions of humans who willingly scared themselves and came out stronger for it. She thought about her own species, who avoided fear so completely that a single traumatic event could disable them for life, who had never learned to sit with terror, to examine it, to make it serve them. For the first time in her career, wondered if the supposedly primitive humans might have something to teach the rest of the galaxy. She was about to find out. The void plague came without warning. One day, ships began going silent. Space stations stopped responding. When rescue teams arrived, they found the crews alive but unresponsive, curled into defensive positions, their eyes wide with terror at nothing. The plague spread across the galaxy like wildfire. It wasn't a virus or a bacteria. It was something worse, something that affected consciousness itself. Victims experienced cascading fear responses triggered by nothing at all. Their minds conjured horrors that didn't exist, then reacted to those horrors as if they were real. The fear fed itself, growing stronger, until the victim's psyche simply shut down. Thousands fell victim in the first week. Tens of thousands in the first month. The Galactic Psychological Consortium mobilized every resource, but their treatments failed. Medication couldn't stop the plague. Traditional therapy couldn't reach the victims. Some patients recovered briefly, only to relapse days later. Doctor watched the crisis unfold from Station Harmony, where she'd returned to present her findings on human horror. Her presentation to the consortium suddenly seemed trivial compared to the mounting catastrophe. Until Chairman made a connection. "You're humans," he said during an emergency meeting. "They experience fear voluntarily. They've developed techniques to manage it. Could those techniques help our patients?" The chamber fell silent. Every psychological expert in the room turned to look at. I don't know," she said honestly. "Human fear management evolved for fictional threats. The void plague creates real psychological damage." "But the fear itself is still fear," said Doctor. "The mechanism is the same. The human brain can't always distinguish between real and imagined threats. That's why horror works on them. Maybe that's why their techniques could work on plague victims." "It's worth trying," said. "We're losing people every day. If there's even a chance human methods could help, we have to explore it." within hours was back on a ship to Earth. This time, she came with an urgent request. She needed human psychological experts, horror creators, anyone who understood how humans processed fear. She needed them to come to Station Harmony and help treat alien patients with conditions they'd never seen before. The human response was immediate. Volunteers flooded in. Therapists, writers, filmmakers, neuroscientists. They dropped their lives without hesitation to help species they'd never met. Was among them. "You want me to help aliens by teaching them about horror stories?" he asked when contacted him. "I know it sounds strange," said. "It sounds amazing," replied. "When do we leave?" At Station Harmony, the human team assembled. There were 20 of them, specialists in fear psychology, horror narrative theory, trauma treatment, and creative arts therapy. They met with the consortium's leading experts to understand the void plague. Doctors studied the patient files with a clinical eye. These victims are experiencing uncontrolled fear spirals. Their minds are stuck in a loop, generating threats and reacting to them. They need to break that loop. "We've tried everything," said a doctor named. "Medication, sensory isolation, neural dampening, nothing works." "Because you're trying to eliminate the fear," said. "That's not how you deal with fear. You have to face it." "These patients are catatonic from fear," said sharply. "You want to expose them to more." "In a controlled way, yes." Pulled up a human therapy model on the display. "Look, when humans develop anxiety disorders, they often fall into avoidance patterns. They avoid whatever scares them, which makes the fear grow stronger. The treatment is gradual exposure. You bring them closer to the fear, but in safe increments. You teach them they can survive it." "But these patients aren't avoiding anything," said. "They're drowning in fear." "Right now, yes. But what if we could teach them to swim?" Looked around the room at the skeptical alien faces. "Horror stories work because they give people a framework for fear, characters who face monsters and survive, narratives where terror has a beginning, middle, and end. What if we could give your patients those frameworks?" Doctor nodded. "We could start very gentle, simple stories with mild tension, nothing graphic or overwhelming, just enough to let patients practice experiencing fear and having it resolve safely." "You want to read horror stories to catatonic patients?" Chairman asked. "We want to give them narrative tools," Doctor said. "A story has structure, setup, conflict, resolution. When you're in a fear spiral, your mind just loops on the fear. But if we can introduce narrative structure, we might help patients find a path through their fear instead of just drowning in it." The consortium was desperate enough to try anything. They selected 10 patients for the initial trial. All had been catatonic for at least 2 weeks. All showed no response to traditional treatment. They had nothing to lose. The human team started slowly. They chose the gentlest stories in their libraries. Not horror at first, just tension. Simple tales with mild conflict and clear resolution. They read to the patients in soft voices, showing them pictures, engaging multiple senses. For days, nothing happened. Then, on the 5th day, a patient named blinked. Just once, but it was the first voluntary movement he'd made in 3 weeks. The human reading to him, a therapist named James, noticed immediately. "Can you hear me?" James kept his voice calm. His eyes focused, barely but they focused, on James, on the book in James's hands. "I'm going to keep reading," James said. "You're safe here, this is just a story." He continued the tale, a simple narrative about a lost child finding their way home. Eyes tracked the words, following along. His breathing, which had been rapid and shallow for weeks, began to slow. By the end of the session, had closed his eyes naturally, not in fear but in something approaching rest. Word spread quickly. Other patients began showing small responses. A named Vex started tracking the reader with her eyes. A called moth made a small sound when a particularly tense moment in a story resolved happily. "It's working," said amazed. "They're engaging with the narratives." But these aren't even horror stories yet, pointed out. They're just stories with tension. That's the point, Doctor explained. We're teaching their brains that tension can resolve, that fear can have an endpoint. Once they grasp that, we can gradually increase the intensity. Over the next 2 weeks, the human team carefully escalated the material. They moved from simple tension to mild scares, from gentle conflict to more serious threats, but always they maintained narrative structure. Setup, escalation, resolution. Every story ended, every fear concluded. The patients began to respond more actively, started making eye contact. Vex began moving her manipulator appendages. Moth, spoke his first words in a month. More story. The humans taught them about horror tropes, the monster under the bed, the strange noise in the night, the unknown threat in the darkness. But more importantly, they taught them about survivors, characters who faced their fears and lived, heroes who looked at monsters and found courage. Worked with personally. He'd learned that had been a spacecraft engineer before the plague struck. You understand systems, said during a session. Fear is a system too. It has inputs and outputs, triggers and responses. Horror stories are a safe way to study that system. His eyes showed interest. Actual interest, not just passive awareness. When you read a horror story, you can see how fear works, how tension builds, how resolution brings relief. You can study it without being trapped by it. Pulled out his own novel. This book is about a haunted space station. People get scared, but by the end they've faced the fear and survived. Want to try it? Managed a small nod. They read together for an hour, watched reactions carefully. When the engineer's breathing quickened during scary parts, paused. You're feeling fear right now, aren't you? Another small nod. That's okay, that's normal, it's a story. The fear can't hurt you, and watch, it's going to resolve soon. Continued reading to the chapter's end, where the characters survived an encounter with the station's ghost. See, they were scared, but they made it through. His breathing had calmed. He looked at with clear eyes for the first time. Again, he said. They read the chapter again. This time's fear response was smaller. He was learning. His brain was understanding that fear could be experienced and survived. Doctor made a breakthrough with a patient named. She had the patient not just listen to stories but create them. Tell me a scary story, she encouraged. Make up something frightening. Struggled at first. His mind kept returning to the shapeless horrors of the void plague, but Doctor guided him gently. Give the scary thing a shape. What does it look like? Where does it live? What does it want? Slowly, haltingly, created a monster. A creature from his species' mythology, something his grandmother had told him about as a hatchling. A shadow eater that lived in caves. Good, Doctor said. Now tell me how someone defeats it. You can't defeat it, said. In this story you can. You're the author. You have all the power. How does someone defeat the Shadow Eater? Thought hard. Then slowly he invented a solution. Light. Bright light that the Shadow Eater couldn't consume. A brave explorer who carried a blazing torch into the caves and drove the monster away. There, Doctor said with a smile. You just wrote a horror story with a happy ending. You took something scary and gave it a resolution. Do you feel how different that is from just being afraid?